exciting show planned for you tonight. We've got marvelous people. We've got
London, June 1969. The air in the Mews cottage is thick and still, heavy with the scent of old roses and something else, something chemical and sweet. It's the kind of silence that follows a storm, a silence that screams. Outside, the world is a riot of color, the last days of the swinging 60s. But inside number 4 Cadogan Lane, time has stopped. The bathroom is small, almost claustrophobic, white tile, cold and unforgiving. On the floor, a woman lies crumpled, a fallen doll in a baby blue nightgown. Her hair, once the brilliant auburn of a Technicolor dream, is a chaotic halo against the porcelain. Her hands, which once commanded standing ovations from thousands, are still. One rests near an empty bottle of Seconal, the little red pills they called dolls. A life's prescription, a final dose. This is Judy Garland. She is 47 years old. Her 5th husband, a handsome nightclub manager named Mickey Deans, finds her. The official story will be a frantic call, a locked door, a desperate discovery. But the truth, like everything in her life, is more complicated. The coroner will later rule it an incautious self-overdosage, a tragic accident, not a suicide. The world he knew wouldn't be able to bear it. But for those who knew her, for those who truly saw past the footlights and the flashbulbs, the distinction was meaningless. Her death wasn't a single act, but a slow, public execution that had begun decades ago, under the Klieg lights of a Hollywood studio. The news breaks like a fever. It crackles over transistor radios in New York City cabs, whispers through the salons of Beverly Hills, and lands like a physical blow in the hearts of millions who had never met her, yet felt they knew her most intimate secrets. Judy is dead. The voice that had carried a generation of dreamers over the rainbow has been silenced. In the days that follow, the media frenzy is a vulture's feast. Headlines scream from newsstands, rehashing the scandals, the breakdowns, the debts, the 5 marriages, the pills. They print a photo of her, taken just weeks before, looking frail and startled, a ghost haunting her own life. They call her a tragedy, a cautionary tale, a victim. They forget she was a force of nature. They forget the sound of that voice, a sound that could tear your heart out and hand it back to you, trembling and alive. They forget the little girl with the big voice, who just wanted to be loved for who she was, not for the spectacle she could create. Before the myth, before the legend, before the tragedy, there was a child named Frances, and her story begins not in a quiet bathroom in London, but on a drafty stage in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, with the smell of grease paint and her mother's relentless ambition. She was born Frances Ethel Gumm on June 10, 1922, into a world of borrowed glamour and second-hand dreams. Her parents, Frank and Ethel, were third-rate vaudevillians, chasing the footlights across the frozen plains of the Midwest. Their stage was wherever they could find one, a dusty town hall, a smoky Elks Lodge, the back of a flatbed truck. Home was a series of rented rooms that always smelled of stale cigarette smoke and desperation. From the moment she could stand, Frances was part of the act. She was Baby Gumm, the pint-sized finale to her older sister's song and dance routine, the Gumm Sisters. Her mother, Ethel, was the driving force, a woman forged in disappointment. She saw in her youngest daughter not a child, but a ticket out. Ethel was a stage mother of terrifying focus, a drill sergeant in a feathered hat. She rehearsed Frances relentlessly, correcting her posture, her phrasing, her smile. Love and approval were conditional, measured in applause. Frances learned early that her worth was tied to the sound of clapping hands. Her father, Frank, was a softer soul, a man with a kind smile and a secret that haunted their nomadic life. He was a closeted gay man, a fact that forced the family to flee towns in the dead of night when whispers grew too loud. Frances adored him, and his secret sorrow would cast a long, complicated shadow over her own life, informing her deep, almost spiritual connection to the gay community, who would one day become her most devoted audience. The Gumm sisters were good, but not great. Just another family act in a sea of them. The change came one night in Chicago when a theater marquee mistakenly billed them as the Glum Sisters. The comedian George Jessel, witnessing their act, suggested a new name. Frances, he said, should be Judy. And Gumm? It had to go. They settled on Garland, plucked from a film critic's review of a Carole Lombard picture. And just like that, Frances Gumm vanished. In her place stood Judy Garland, a name that shimmered with promise. But the real transformation happened in 1935, when Ethel, ever relentless, finagled an audition with the biggest dream factory on earth, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. In a room full of polished executives, including the formidable Louis B. Mayer himself, this 13-year-old girl stood, all of 4 feet 11 inches, with big, dark, searching eyes. She sang, "Zing," went the strings of my heart. And the sound that came out of her was not a child's. It was a lament, a torch song, a force of nature. It was raw, powerful, and utterly heartbreaking. The executives were stunned. They didn't know what to do with her. She wasn't a blonde bombshell like Jean Harlow or a demure beauty like Myrna Loy. She was something else. As one producer famously remarked, "We don't know if she's a hunchback, but she's got a great voice." They signed her without a screen test, an unprecedented act. For Judy, it was the culmination of her mother's wildest dreams. It was also the moment she was sold into the most beautiful, brutal servitude imaginable. The gates of MGM were pearly white, but inside it was a factory floor. Judy Garland was no longer a person. She was a product, and Louis B. Mayer was the chief engineer. The studio system of the 1930s was a world of absolute control. They owned your name, your image, your time, your body. For Judy, a teenager already shadowed by insecurity, this control was a quiet, daily violence. They called her the Little Hunchback because of her curved spine. They put caps on her teeth and rubber discs in her nose to reshape it for the camera. Her weight became a studio obsession. Mayer, the patriarch of this celluloid family, would patrol the commissary, inspecting her plate, allegedly chiding her, "You look like a fat little pig." To mold her into the all-American girl next door, they put her on a punishing diet: black coffee, chicken soup, and 80 cigarettes a day to suppress her appetite. To keep up with the grueling 18-hour days of filming, rehearsing, and recording, the studio physician prescribed amphetamines, pep pills, to wake her up. And when the day was over, when her mind was racing and she couldn't sleep, he gave her barbiturates and sleeping pills to knock her out. She was 15 years old. The studio was her supplier, and the addiction that would define and destroy her life began not in a back alley, but in the pristine infirmary of the world's most glamorous movie studio. She was paired with Mickey Rooney, another child star trapped in the machine. Together they were box office gold, a whirlwind of adolescent energy in the Andy Hardy series. They made 9 films together, their on-screen chemistry a perfect illusion of wholesome American youth. Off-screen, they were 2 exhausted kids, propped up by pills and pressure. "They had us working day and night," Judy would later recall. "They'd give us pills to keep us on our feet long after we were exhausted. Then they'd take us to the studio hospital and knock us out with sleeping pills. Then after 4 hours, they'd wake us up and give us the pep pills again. That's the way we worked, and that's the way we got thin. That's the way we got mixed up." Then came the rainbow. In 1939, at 16, she was cast as Dorothy Gale in The Wizard of Oz. It wasn't a role she was supposed to have. The studio wanted Shirley Temple. But destiny and a contractual dispute intervened. On set, the abuse continued. She was corseted so tightly she could barely breathe to flatten her budding chest. The director, Victor Fleming, a man of gruff masculinity, once slapped her when she couldn't stop giggling in a scene. But through it all, she poured every ounce of her longing, her loneliness, and her hope into that role. When she sang Over the Rainbow, it wasn't just a song. It was a prayer. It was the anthem of every person who ever felt small, lost, and desperate for a place where the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. The film made her an international superstar. It also cemented her persona as the eternal innocent, a role she would spend the rest of her life trying to escape. The little girl from Grand Rapids had found her Emerald City. She didn't know yet that it was built on a foundation of lies, and that the wizard behind the curtain held a syringe in his hand. Fame brought Judy Garland adoration, but it offered no refuge from her own heart. Her life became a frantic search for the unconditional love she never had, a search that played out in a series of passionate, tumultuous, and ultimately doomed romances. She fell in love with the intensity of a lyric from one of her torch songs, throwing herself into relationships with a desperate hope that this time, this man, would be the one to save her. Her first husband was the bandleader David Rose. She was 19, he was 31. It was an act of rebellion against the studio, against her mother. MGM and Ethel were horrified. A married Dorothy Gale? Unthinkable. The studio arranged the wedding but controlled the narrative. When Judy became pregnant, they, along with her mother, forced her to have an abortion. The procedure was secret, brutal, and emotionally devastating. The marriage crumbled soon after. It was the first of many betrayals, a searing lesson that her body, like her career, was not her own. Then came Vincente Minnelli, the visionary director who saw past the girl next door and glimpsed the sophisticated, complex woman within. He directed her in Meet Me in St. Louis, transforming her on screen into a breathtaking beauty. He gave her confidence, treated her like an artist. They married in 1945 and had a daughter, Liza. For a brief, shimmering moment, it seemed like a fairy tale. Their home was a salon for Hollywood's creative elite. But here, too, shadows gathered. Minnelli, like her father, was a man with his own secrets, navigating the treacherous waters of bisexuality in a homophobic era. The pressures on their marriage, compounded by Judy's escalating pill dependency and deepening insecurities, were immense. The fairy tale unraveled into a series of public fights and private agonies. Her third husband, Sid Luft, was a different kind of man, a tough, charismatic former test pilot and producer. He was no artist. He was a manager, a promoter, a gambler. He saw the wreckage of her MGM career. She had been fired in 1950 for her unreliability and saw a golden opportunity. He became the architect of her legendary comeback. He produced A Star Is Born and masterminded her triumphant concert tours. He gave her 2 more children, Lorna and Joey, but their relationship was a battlefield. It was a toxic cocktail of passion, codependency, and violence. There were screaming matches, physical altercations, and constant battles over money. Luft was a heavy gambler, and Judy's enormous earnings vanished as quickly as they came. He was both her savior and her tormentor, the man who pushed her back onto the stage and the one who profited from her pain. Their divorce was a brutal, public spectacle, a war of headlines and accusations that left her financially ruined and emotionally shattered. After Luft, there were 2 more brief, ill-fated marriages, each a desperate grasp for stability in the swirling chaos of her final years. "I've had a lot of unhappiness in my life," she once said, with devastating simplicity. "And a lot of happiness. I'm a walking cliché." To understand Judy Garland, you cannot just look at the wreckage. You must see her on a stage. Any stage. The Palace in New York, 1951. The marquee just says Judy. The house is sold out. She walks out from the wings, a small figure in a sequined pantsuit, and the room explodes. It's not just applause, it's a roar, a wave of pure, unadulterated love. She looks fragile, almost startled by the force of it. She clutches the microphone stand like a life raft. And then she sings, and the world stops. The voice that pours out of her is not just a voice. It's a raw nerve. It's every heartbreak, every disappointment, every pill, every betrayal, every flicker of hope transmuted into sound. It cracks with vulnerability on one note and soars with indomitable strength on the next. She doesn't just sing a song, she inhabits it, dissects it, lives it out in front of you for 3.5 minutes. Her hands gesture, her body trembles. She is performing a public exorcism, and the audience is her congregation. They see their own struggles in her. They see their own resilience. When she sings The Man That Got Away, a song of shattering loss, she rips the lyrics from her soul. When she sings Over the Rainbow, it's no longer a child's lullaby. It's a survivor's anthem, sung with the full, painful knowledge of what lies on the other side. Her 1951 Palace Theater engagement was a phenomenon, a comeback of such magnitude it became theatrical legend. It ran for a record-breaking 19 weeks, a testament to her unparalleled power as a live performer. She followed it with the film A Star is Born in 1954, her magnum opus. Her portrayal of Vicki Lester, a rising star whose career eclipses her self-destructive husband's, was more than a performance. It was a baring of the soul. The role earned her an Academy Award nomination. The night of the Oscars, she was in the hospital, having just given birth to her son, Joey. NBC had cameras set up in her room, so certain was she of winning, but the award went to Grace Kelly. It was a crushing blow, one many saw as Hollywood's final cruel rejection, but the stage was always there. Her 1961 concert at Carnegie Hall is widely considered the single greatest night in show business history. The resulting double album won 5 Grammy Awards, including Album of the Year. She was magic. On stage, the demons that plagued her private life were transfigured into artistic power. She held nothing back. She gave the audience everything. She would end her shows drenched in sweat, emotionally spent, sometimes collapsing in the wings. Her fans, especially her massive gay following who saw in her a symbol of survival against impossible odds, would rush the stage, handing her flowers, weeping. They adored her, but that adoration was a drug too. It was a love she had to earn, night after night, song after song. It was a love that demanded she bleed for them, and she did. Until there was almost nothing left. The unraveling was not a single event, but a slow, cruel corrosion, like acid eating away at a masterpiece. The same demons that fueled her art began to consume the artist. The pills were no longer a secret crutch. They were a visible, destructive force. Her behavior became erratic, her moods swinging violently between manic highs and crippling, paranoid lows. The line between Judy Garland, the performer, and Judy Gumm, the frightened, insecure woman, blurred and then vanished completely. Her television series, The Judy Garland Show, launched in 1963, was meant to be another glorious comeback. It was a showcase for her titanic talent, featuring legendary duets with Barbra Streisand, Lena Horne, and her own daughter, Liza. But behind the scenes, it was a catastrophe. She was often late, unprepared, sometimes unable to perform at all. She would lock herself in her dressing room for hours, emerging either incandescent or incoherent. The network executives, battling with her over creative control and terrified of her volatility, scheduled the show opposite the ratings juggernaut Bonanza. It was a death sentence. The show was canceled after one season, another public failure that fed her deepest fears of being unwanted. The concerts, once her sanctuary, became sites of public humiliation. In Melbourne, Australia, in 1964, she arrived on stage an hour late, visibly intoxicated. She stumbled through songs, forgot lyrics, and was mercilessly heckled by the crowd. They booed their idol off the stage. The headlines were savage. The woman who had commanded Carnegie Hall was now a spectacle of decay. There were other nights like that, in Las Vegas, in London, nights where the magic failed, where all the audience could see was the damage. Her friends watched, helpless. She was a woman who was in a state of terror, said her accompanist, Saul Chaplin. Terror of not being loved, of not being able to do it again, not being able to be as good. She was surrounded by people, yet profoundly alone. The enablers, the sycophants, the managers who profited from her work, they kept her supplied with pills and pushed her back toward the microphone, no matter the cost. She was trapped in a cycle of debt, addiction, and performance. The stage was the only place she could earn the money to pay for the doctors and the pills that were supposed to help her keep performing. It was a perfect, self-devouring machine. In her quiet moments, in the pre-dawn silence of a luxury hotel suite where the phone had stopped ringing, the terror was absolute. It was the terror of the little girl from Grand Rapids, still standing on a stage, waiting for an applause that could never quite drown out the sound of her own breaking heart. The final years were a portrait of nomadic desperation. Stripped of her home by the IRS, her children living with their father, Judy became a wanderer, living out of suitcases in hotel rooms across the world. She was a legend without a kingdom. The voice, once a torrent of power and emotion, was now a fragile, frayed instrument. Some nights, it was still there, a ghost of its former glory, capable of moments of breathtaking beauty. Other nights, it was a painful rasp, a shadow of the sound that had once defined an era. She chased work wherever she could find it, accepting engagements in dingy nightclubs and second-rate theaters, places that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. She was playing Talk of the Town, a London supper club, in the winter of 1969. The reviews were a painful mix of pity and nostalgia. Some nights she was brilliant. Other nights she was a disaster, showing up late, slurring her words, a tragic echo of her younger self. The audiences were a mix of die-hard fans who would love her no matter what, and curious onlookers who had come to see a ruin. It was in London that she met Mickey Deans, a handsome, ambitious American disco manager 12 years her junior. To the bruised and lonely star, he seemed like a lifeline. To her friends, he looked like an opportunist. They married in March 1969. She was radiant but frail, clinging to him like a lost child. Finally, I am loved, she told reporters. It was her 5th marriage, another desperate gamble on a happy ending. She spoke of settling down, of writing her memoirs, of finding peace. She seemed to believe it. "This is it," she said. "For the first time in my life, I am really happy." But there was no peace to be found. The years of abuse, the pills, the alcohol, the diets, the stress had ravaged her body. She was perpetually exhausted, her tiny frame weathered by a lifetime of storms. The London engagement ended, and the future was a terrifying blank. The debts were insurmountable, the offers had dried up. She and Dean settled into the small rented house in Cadogan Lane. The quiet that descended was not peaceful, it was deafening. The roar of the crowd was gone. The music had stopped. There was only the silence of a small room and the ghosts of 1,000 standing ovations. The final performance was over. There were no more songs to sing. The news of her death sent a seismic shockwave of grief across the globe. In New York, on a hot June day, over 22,000 people, a line stretching for more than a mile, stood for hours in the sweltering heat outside the Frank E. Campbell Funeral Chapel on Madison Avenue. They were a cross-section of humanity, housewives from Queens, bankers from Wall Street, young men with tears streaming down their faces. They came to say goodbye to Dorothy. They came to mourn a voice that had been the soundtrack to their lives. Inside, she lay in a glass-topped coffin, dressed in the high-collared gray chiffon gown she had worn at her last wedding. Her daughter Liza Minnelli stood stoically, greeting the mourners, a young woman forced into impossible strength. Her father, Vincente Minnelli, stood nearby, as did Sid Luft. James Mason, her co-star from A Star is Born, delivered the eulogy. He did not speak of tragedy. He spoke of her resilience. Judy's great gift, he said, was that she could wring tears out of hearts of rock. She gave so richly and so generously that there was no currency in which to repay her. The funeral was a spectacle, but the grief was real and profound. Her death was particularly devastating to the gay community, who saw her as their patron saint of survival. The night of her funeral, June 27, 1969, the patrons of the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar in Greenwich Village, were in a state of collective mourning. When the police raided the bar that night, a common occurrence of harassment, something snapped. The grief and anger of a marginalized community, galvanized by the loss of their icon who embodied both struggle and defiance, erupted into resistance. The Stonewall riots began, an event that is now credited as the single most important catalyst for the gay rights movement. It is a strange and beautiful irony of history that the end of Judy Garland's life coincided with the birth of a revolution fought for by the very people who loved her most. What remains of Judy Garland? The myth is powerful and often it eclipses the woman. She is the tragic star, the ultimate victim of Hollywood's cruelty. She is the rainbow, the symbol of childlike innocence. She is the gay icon, the queen of the comeback, the patron saint of survivors. She is all of these things and none of them. The danger of the myth is that it flattens a life of staggering complexity into a simple cautionary tale. It turns her into a symbol, and in doing so, it steals her humanity. To find the real Judy, you must listen. Not to the gossip, not to the headlines, but to the recordings. Listen to the way her voice trembles on the word love in The Man That Got Away. Listen to the defiant joy in her rendition of Get Happy. Listen to the weary, heartbreaking hope in Over the Rainbow, sung not by a girl in gingham, but by a woman who has seen the other side and is still, somehow, daring to dream. Her legacy is not in the pills or the scandals. It is in that sound. A sound that captured the entire spectrum of human experience. She was a paradox. She was a giant in a tiny frame. An artist of breathtaking discipline and a woman in the throes of chaos. She was adored by millions and died profoundly lonely. Her story is a testament to the quiet violence of being loved not for who you are, but for what you can give. The world wanted her joy, her pain, her voice. It wanted her to bleed onto the stage night after night, and she did, because it was the only way she knew how to live. She was, as one critic wrote, the most tragic and the most triumphant figure of her generation. The applause was deafening, but it could never fill the silence inside. Her legacy is a reminder that behind every great myth is a human heart, and that the cost of creating a legend can be the life of the person who has to bear its weight. So let the final spotlight fall not on the empty pill bottle in the cold London bathroom. Let it fall not on the screaming headlines or the public breakdowns. Let it fall instead on a moment of pure, unadulterated creation. Picture her in a recording studio, headphones on, eyes closed. The orchestra swells. She takes a breath. For a few perfect, transcendent minutes, there is no Ethel, no Meyer, no pills, no debts, no broken marriages. There is only the music. There is only the voice, a voice that seems to come from some ancient, collective place of human longing. She never found the place over the rainbow. Perhaps she knew, better than anyone, that it didn't exist. The peace she sang about was always just out of reach. But in her search for it, she gave the rest of the world a map. She gave us a soundtrack for our own joys and sorrows. She took the broken pieces of her own life and transformed them into an art so powerful it became a form of grace. We remember the tragedy because it is a part of the story. But to let it be the whole story is the final injustice. Forget the fallen star. Remember the fire. Remember the small girl with the impossible voice who stood on a stage, looked out into the darkness, and sang her heart out, just for us. The applause has faded. The curtain has fallen. But the voice remains. And it is immortal.